They thought they could bleed me dry with hidden fees and bully tactics. When the HOA raised my pool fee out of pure spite, I decided to strike back, not with anger, but with precision. What started as one small act of revenge turned into a complete financial lockdown that left every board member begging for mercy. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA and neighbor from hell stories where justice finally gets served. You won't believe how this one ends. It's a masterclass in turning the tables. It all began in the sun-bleached suburbs of Willow Creek Estates, a quiet, picture-perfect community tucked behind manicured hedges and uniform lawns. On the surface, everything looked peaceful, but beneath the layers of perfectly edged grass and freshly painted mailboxes lurked an HOA that ruled with an iron fist. The board wasn't about maintaining harmony, it was about control. Their favorite pastime was enforcing pointless rules and punishing anyone who dared to question their authority. For years, I'd stayed under the radar, paying my dues, attending the occasional meeting, and trying to avoid the drama. That changed when I decided to renovate my backyard and install a small pool. It was nothing extravagant, just a modest lap pool to help me unwind after long workdays. The HOA approved it, but soon after construction began, whispers started. One of the board members, Marla, took it personally that I'd improved my property. She believed every upgrade outside of her vision of uniformity was a personal insult. Within a month of finishing the pool, a notice arrived in my mailbox. Due to maintenance impact on shared infrastructure, your HOA pool fee has been increased by $250 per month. There was no shared infrastructure involved. My pool was private, fully funded, and independently maintained. When I confronted them at the next HOA meeting, they dismissed me with smirks. Marla said the fee was to ensure fairness. What she meant was to make an example out of me. I went home furious but determined. Instead of paying the inflated fee blindly, I decided to dig into the HOA's financials. As a member, I had the right to review their budget. What I found wasn't just mismanagement, it was a goldmine of corruption. The board had been padding maintenance funds for years, hiding personal expenses under vague labels. Landscaping contracts were inflated. Cleaning services charged triple market rates, all approved by Marla and her cronies. My overcharged pool fee was the least of it. That night, as I stared at the spreadsheets, I realized I had the power to expose them, not just to the residents, but to the state auditors if necessary. But to pull it off, I needed to play it smart. I couldn't just call them out. I had to lock them in a situation they couldn't squirm out of. And that's when I began planning what I called the budget lockdown. The next morning, I started documenting everything: copies of invoices, screenshots of payments, and meeting minutes showing questionable approvals. I even noticed that Marla's husband's company had been awarded the cleaning contract, without any bids from other vendors. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a dossier thicker than the HOA's rulebook. But exposure wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the same helpless frustration they'd inflicted on me. I needed to use the rules against them. That's when I found it, a clause buried deep in the bylaws. It allowed any homeowner, with sufficient evidence of financial misconduct, to trigger a budget freeze audit. Once initiated, the HOA couldn't spend a single cent until the audit was complete. No landscaping, no events, not even reimbursements to board members. And the kicker? The audit had to be funded from the existing reserve. If misappropriation was confirmed, the board members could be held personally liable. My hands trembled as I reread it. This was my silver bullet. All I needed was one signature from another resident to file it. The board had made plenty of enemies, and I knew exactly who to ask. As I printed the form and gathered my documents, a sense of calm washed over me. They thought they could punish me with a fee. I was about to punish them with financial paralysis. Filing the budget freeze was easier than I expected. My neighbor Sam, a retired accountant who'd had his own run-ins with the HOA, didn't hesitate to co-sign. We submitted the request formally, with a full binder of supporting documents directly to the HOA's management company. Within 72 hours, a notice went out to all homeowners. Pending audit review, all discretionary spending is suspended. The panic among the board was immediate. I watched it unfold from a distance. Canceled landscaping services, delayed maintenance, and frantic emails begging for emergency approval to pay vendors. But the rules were clear. Until the audit concluded, every expenditure required approval from an independent CPA appointed by the state HOA Oversight Office. They were trapped. At first, Marla tried to act unfazed, brushing it off as a routine review. But as weeks passed, the HOA's carefully curated image started to crumble. The lush lawns grew uneven. The fountain at the neighborhood entrance stopped running. Even the community pool, ironically, had to close due to unpaid cleaning bills. Residents began complaining. With no budget access, Marla and her allies had to attend town hall meetings where angry homeowners demanded answers. Each time I sat quietly in the back, listening to them twist their explanations. Every word they spoke dug them deeper. The audit was brutal. It revealed tens of thousands of dollars unaccounted for, suspicious vendor payments, and reimbursements for board retreats that had no receipts. When the auditors called me for an interview, I simply handed over my documentation and let the evidence speak. What had begun as revenge was turning into a community-wide reckoning. But Marla wasn't done. Her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat. She began a smear campaign claiming I'd sabotaged the HOA and endangered property values. Flyers appeared on doorsteps. Anonymous posts filled the neighborhood forum. It was classic deflection. What she didn't know was that the audit findings were public record. Once the report was finalized, I planned to distribute it to every resident. The truth would dismantle her empire of manipulation once and for all. Then came the moment that changed everything. The auditors discovered that the HOA's reserve fund, supposed to hold $120,000, was nearly empty. Most of it had been siphoned into maintenance reimbursements linked to Marla's husband's company. The evidence was undeniable. When the management company realized the legal implications, they immediately suspended the entire board pending investigation. For the first time in years, Willow Creek Estates was free from their grip. But freedom came with chaos. Without a functioning board, all decisions were frozen. Trash piled up, lawns went wild, and resentment brewed. Some neighbors turned on me, blaming me for the disruption. I understood their frustration, but I also knew this pain was temporary, necessary even. Corruption had to be purged before real order could return. Still, the silence from the HOA office was unsettling. Days turned into weeks with no updates, until one morning I received a thick envelope labeled Audit Resolution Notice. My hands shook as I opened it. The findings were worse than I imagined. Not only had Marla's board embezzled funds, but they had also failed to file taxes properly for 3 consecutive years. The HOA now faced state penalties, and the only way to avoid bankruptcy was to restructure under state supervision. That meant new elections, full transparency, and mandatory caps on dues. It was poetic justice. Yet deep down, I knew Marla wouldn't go quietly. She'd built her power on intimidation. She'd find a way to retaliate. Marla's revenge came not through official channels, but through whispers and manipulation. Despite her suspension, she still had friends among the residents, people who believed her lies. They started showing up at my property, snapping photos, claiming I'd violated aesthetic uniformity. It was laughable, considering the HOA no longer had authority to enforce anything. But their harassment escalated. One morning, I found a letter taped to my door, written in red marker. "You destroyed our community." For a moment, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Was the victory worth it? The street looked desolate, overgrown lawns, broken lights, and a neighborhood stripped of its shine. Yet I reminded myself, this was temporary chaos replacing years of quiet tyranny. The storm before renewal. The state soon stepped in to appoint an interim administrator. A no-nonsense auditor named Patricia took control. Her first act was to call a community meeting, where she laid out the reality. The HOA's finances have been abused. We will rebuild, but it will take time and cooperation. For once, the room was silent. Even Marla's sympathizers had nothing to say. The audit results were displayed on a projector. Pages of fraudulent transactions, unapproved transfers, and falsified receipts. Patricia made it clear, every dollar misused would be reclaimed through legal means. Marla and her husband were being referred to the district attorney's office for potential charges. The crowd gasped. The spell of fear she'd cast for years shattered in an instant. As weeks passed, the transformation began. Vendors returned, real maintenance resumed, and trust slowly rebuilt. Patricia restructured the budget so tightly that no future board could manipulate it. Every cent had to be publicly logged, every expense justified. The budget lockdown I triggered had evolved into a permanent system of accountability. By summer, Willow Creek Estates felt different. The air was lighter, laughter returned, and neighbors began greeting each other again. One afternoon, as I swam laps in my pool, I noticed Marla's house, once pristine, was now empty. "For sale" sign out front. She'd fled, unable to face the consequences. Her empire was gone, her influence erased. I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. The HOA hadn't just changed, it had been reborn. When the first new election was held under Patricia's supervision, I declined to run for the board. I didn't want power, I wanted peace. The community needed new leaders, untainted by old grudges. Watching them take their oaths, I realized the true victory wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The HOA that once tried to crush me now stood as a model of transparency. The budget lockdown had become their blueprint for reform, a safeguard against corruption. Months later, I received a letter from the state office thanking me for initiating the audit that led to systemic changes across several neighboring HOAs. Apparently, the case had exposed a pattern of abuse in multiple communities. My quiet rebellion had started a ripple effect far beyond Willow Creek. As I folded the letter and looked out over my calm blue pool, I thought about how it all began, with a petty fee meant to break me. Instead, it broke the system that allowed people like Marla to thrive, and that, I thought, was the best revenge of all. A year later, the HOA that once drowned in scandal had transformed into a beacon of reform. The budget portal was now public, residents voted digitally on expenditures, and community events flourished again. New leadership encouraged feedback, turning meetings from shouting matches into constructive discussions. The state cited Willow Creek as an example of post-audit governance success. I'd moved on, focusing on work and enjoying the peace I'd fought for, but I often received emails from neighboring communities asking for advice on how to audit-proof their HOAs. I'd smile, remembering those endless nights spent combing through spreadsheets, and reply with a single sentence, "Transparency is your strongest defense." But even peace has echoes. Occasionally, I'd spot Marla's name in court updates facing civil suits for restitution. Justice, it seemed, had a long memory. One evening, while attending the HOA's annual meeting as an observer, Patricia announced that the HOA had not only recovered lost funds, but had surplus reserves for the first time in a decade. Applause filled the room. The same people who once doubted me now nodded in appreciation. It wasn't pride I felt, it was closure. The circle had completed itself. What began with a vengeful pool fee had ended in community rebirth. I left the meeting that night under the glow of restored streetlights, the same paths that once felt hostile now warm and familiar. As I passed the entrance fountain, now repaired and illuminated, I couldn't help but smile. The sound of the water mirrored the serenity I'd fought to reclaim. The HOA hadn't jacked up just my pool fee. They'd jacked up their own fate, and I'd made sure they could never escape the consequences. If you enjoyed this story of poetic HOA justice, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next saga of neighborhood drama and well-deserved karma. Trust me, there's always another HOA disaster waiting to unfold.